Do you think you know the people around you? You believe you can identify when some Aion is toxic, when an energy is Shivi, when a behavior crosses the line off what is acceptable. But what if he told you that the real dangers are notorious? That the most destructive people are often charming, kind, event family members, and that while you try to protect yourself from the obvious villains, you are opening the doors of your mind to something infinitely more dangerous, the unconscious of others invading your own. Carl Gustav Jung dedicated his life to studying these hidden dynamics. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he reveals that most of what truly governs us is not under our conscious control. This applies not just to you, it applies to everyone. And that is precisely where danger lies. Because when someone is blind to their own darkness, that shadow seeks a host. And often that host is you. Perhaps you have never stopped to think about this. But think now. How many times have you felt emotionally drained after talking to someone? How many times have you been blamed for something you didn't do or treated as savior of a tragedy that wasn't even yours? Jung called this projection an unconscious mechanism where the other projects onto you what they refuse to see in themselves. From that moment on, you cease to be a person and become a symbol, a mirror, an imaginary enemy, an idealized hero. And all these and Mag shave something in common. None of them is truly you. But the most frightening part is that often you don't even realize you are in this game. You think you are helping, that you are being empathetic, that you are being mature, meanwhile you are sinking into a psychological field that is not yours, trying to resolve conflicts that are not yours, being manipulated by dynamics that were not created by you, but now control you. And it's not just a brutal intention Edpol. Jung made it clear the great stingers do not come from conscious perverts, but from unintegrated, unconscious ones. They are those wholly alienated from their own psyche, dominated by masks, traumas, complexes, and repressed desires. They are Notville. They are dangerous, and this danger is silent. It doesn't come in through the front door. It infiltrates daily through small comments, violent accusations, loaded silences until you start to doubt yourself. And when you lose contact with your own psychic reality, you become part of their shadow. Perhaps you are going through exactly this right now in a relationship, in a friendship, in a work environment, even within your own family. And perhaps you are blaming yourself, trying to understand what is wrong with you. The answer is nothing, but there is something deeply wrong with way you are being used as a vessel for someone else's unconscious. In this video, we will expose one by one the 6 types of people that Jung would identify as emotionally dangerous types that act not with deliberate malice but with internal forces they themselves do not understand. And that is why they are so destructive. We will use Jung's words, his concepts and warnings directly from his works such as Aion, The Ego and the Unconscious and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious to show you how to recognize these profiles. But more than that, we will open your eyes to the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, one or more of these profiles is within you as well. Are you ready? Then take a deep breath and move forward. But be warned, after hearing this, you will no longer be able to look at people or even at yourself the same way. Imagine living with someone who blames you for everything they feel, who turns your presence into a trigger, who makes you feel responsible for emotions you never caused. At first they seem fragile, sensitive, deep, but over time you realize you are being dragged into a battlefield that isn't yours and where AO are already at a disadvantage. This is the unconscious manipulate. Someone who is unaware of their own wounds but projects them onto others as a form of psychic survival. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate, and often this fate has a name, a face, and shares the table with you." The unconscious manipulator is somehow dominated by repressed content, unintegrated traumas, unprocessed emotional fragments. Instead of looking inward, they aim at you and turn you into a canvas for their internal conflicts. This type of person lives in a state of chronic rejection. According to Jung, projecting is an inevitable function of psyche, but if unrecognized, it becomes destructive. In the book, The Ego and the Unconscious, he states that projection causes a kind of psychic blindness. A prison where the other ceases to be seen as they are and becomes used as a symbol of what Ishiden in us. This is exactly what the unconscious manipulate does. They do not see you, they see a lost part of themselves and react to it as if it were real. These people often position themselves as victims. Everything that happens is someone else's fault, never theirs. When they feel anger, it's because you provoked it. When they are sad, it's because you disappointed them. When they feel inferior, it's because you think you are superior. This distortion is so subtle that you start to question yourself. Was I really insensitive? Did I say something wrong? Am I toxic? And thus, manipulation occurs without a shout being heard, without a direct request being made. It's all-emotional, unconscious, and absolutely effective. Worse still, often these people are charming. They have charisma, sensitivity, an aura of emotional intensity. This creates a trap. Bakaseo think you can help them, heal them, understand them better than others. But what you are doing in practice is sacrificing your psychic health, trying to rescue someone who refuses to devento themselves. And the more you try, the more you sink. Jung warns us that these patterns of projection are especially dangerous best they place us in a symbolic role. Savior, enemy, traitor, father, mother, anything but who we really are, and living in a symbolic bond is living in an illusion. You cease to be seen as a subject and are treated as a distorted reflection of the other's unconscious. The only way to protect yourself from an unconscious manipulator is to develop awareness, recognize the patterns, cut the invisible threads that connect you to this person's emotional narrative, and most importantly, constantly ask yourself if what you are feeling is yours or has been induced. Because the unconscious manipulator does not invade your life violently. They enter through the gap of your empathy. And once you recognize this pattern, the next step is to understand how it disguises itself even more deeply with the mask of the persona. The one who not only projects but acts lives in order to appear as something they are not. In the next section, we will explore the bearer of persona and how it represents one of the greatest psychological risks pointed out by Jung. Because while the unconscious manipulator throws their conflicts onto you, the bearer of the persona can drag you into a world where even you forget who you really are. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Not all psychological danger comes from extreme behaviors. Some it comes from what seems too perfect, from the ever-ready smile, from the impeccable posture, from the flawless image. We live in an era of appearance where being is less important than seeming. And this for Jung was a serious problem because when someone identifies too much with their own persona, the social mask we use to adapt to fueled. They risk completely discanting from their essence. And those who live for the mask not only lose themselves, but also begin to distort everyone around them. In Febook, The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung states that the persona is what someone is not but what he and others think he is. In other words, an artificial constructing shaped by social, familial, and professional expectations. In itself, the persona is not a mistake. We'll use it. It allows us to fulfill social roles to be a doctor, teacher, brother, friend. The problem begins when someone believes they are only that. When the mask sticks to the face and of everything that is spontaneous, vulnerable, and authentic is locked in the basement of the psyche. The bearer of the persona is the master of functionals philocuri. They say what others want to hear. They behave in the right way. They avoid conflicts at all costs, but behind the curtain of control there is a soul in ruins. Because the more they sustain the image, the more they suffocate the self. And this repression sooner or later exacts its price. For those who live with this type of person, the impact is profound. You feel that something is wrong, but you can't say that. There is a lack of spontaneity, of truth, of depth in the interactions. Everything seems rehearsed. And worse, the bearer of the persona projects this demand for perfection onto you as well. They expect you to perform, to fit in, to collaborate with the theater. If you express something outside the script, An intense emotion, a doubt, a pain, their treat, become uncomfortable, shut down because everything that reminds them of hot is repressed within become unbearable. Jung warned that this type of identification with the persona is one of the greatest threats to the process of individuation, the path of self-knowledge and integration of the unconscious. For him, the real danger begins when the individual is hypnotized by the role they play, believing they are what others see. And that is exactly where the risk lies. When someone lives on Lido, be accepted, recognized, praised, they become a hostage to their own facade. And everything that is genuinity is suffocated behind the veneer. Living with someone like this can lead you to doubt your own spontaneity. You start to policy yourself, to measure your words, to hide parts of yourself that don't fit the ideal narrative. Gradually, you also begin to wear a mask and don't even notice. Coexisting with a bearer of the persona is not just artificial. It is contagious. But there is something even darker than that. Because when someone represses what they feel, think, and desire for too long, it doesn't disappear. It accumulates. It ferments in the unconscious until it transforms into shadow. And then we enter an ever more dangerous territory, that of denied emotions that return with explosive force. In the next section, we will devento the figure of the owner of their pressed shadow, the one who refuses to see their own dark side until it explodes. There is a type of person who lives controlled, polished, restrained, always correct, always moderate, always polite. But behind this veneer of balance lies a force about to break free. Because everything they consider wrong, ugly, or unacceptable is simply pushed down into the basement of the soul. It is not overcome nor transformed. It is merely repressed. This is the essence of the owner of their pressed shadow. Someone who tries to blight all the time until the darkness takes control. Carl Jung dedicated a good part of his work to understanding the shadow. In Aion, he states, "The shadow is everything that the individual refuses to recognize in themselves and yet insists on manifesting in some way." We're not talking about something external. The shadow is not the evil of the world. It is not the other. It is not the enemy. The shadow is internal. It is the hatred you do not admit to feeling. It is the envy you rationalize. It is the sexuality you repress. It is the ambition you disguise as humility. Everything you reject in yourself does not disappear. It transforms into shadow. And as Jung taught, what you don't make conscious directs your life, and you call it destiny. The owner of the repressed shadow does not seem dangerous at first glance. On the contrary, often they are admired, disciplined, kind, helpful. But there is something strange. They do not tolerate weakness in others. They react poorly to spontaneity. They are bothered by intense emotions. They always seem charged but never explode. Until they do. And when that happens, it is devastating. This person lives in constant emotional vigilance. They don't allow themselves to feel, and for that reason they condemn those who do. They do not allow themselves to err, and for that reason they attack those who do. They become moralistic, demanding, controlling. But all of this is just an attempt to keep the unconscious under control. Jung was clear: the stronger the persona, the more repressed the shadow. And the more repressed the shadow, the more brutal its manifestation will be. You can identify this pattern in people who have a disproportionate reactions, who explode over small things, who hold grudges for years, who sabotage relationships in a passive-aggressive manner. They are thoughtfulness difficult people whom no one understands why they are so bitter, so resentful, so critical. The answer lies in the shadow, unintegrated, unrecognized, unaccepted. And here is most important point. The shadow isn't just made of bad things. Jung made it clear that it also contains your need potential, your repressed creativity, your hidden strength. But when the shadow is ignored, all of this turns into poison. And this poison contaminates the relationship, the environment, and especially those who are closest. Living with the owner of the repressed shadow is like living next to an emotional minefield. You never know where you are stepping until you are hit. But this repression does not arise from nowhere. Often it is fed by an illusion of superiority, By a rigid moral ideal patterns guilt into a tool of control? This is where we enter the figure of the next type, the moral controller. Someone who not only represses their own desires but makes you feel guilty for living yours. In the next part, we will unmask this type that Jung saw as one of the greatest obstacles to psychic freedom, the guardian of virtue who deep down hides their omens. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some use crosses, rules, dogmas, and ready-made phrases. They are Thasu who claim to be driven by ethics, righteousness, and morality. But deep down, they are imprisoning themselves and others within a cage made of guilt and shame. Jung was well aware of this archetype. For him, when morality is used as a facade, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychic repression. This is the case of the moral controller. Someone who, instead of integrating their shadow projects tanto the behavior of others and condemns them for what they do not accept in themselves. You have certainly met some Aion like this. People who frequent lipen fingers but never look inward, while position themselves as a reference for behavior not because they truly are, but because they desperately need to maintain an image of moral superiority according to Jung. The greater their oppression, the more intense the need to project the shadow. And that is exactly what the moral controller does, transforms others into sinners, deviants, immoral to avoid facing their own desires, impulses, and contradictions. The problem is that, unlike a common emotional manipulator, the moral controller believes they are doing good. They genuinely think they are correcting, saving, or educating the other. And this makes their influence even more toxic because it is cloaked in authority, good intentions, and false spirituality. The criticism comes accompanied by phrases like, "It's for your own good," "You'll thank me later," or "Someone needs to tell you the truth, but this truth is not neutral. It is laden with projection." In the book, Aion, Jung extensively discusses the figure of Christ and the Antichrist as archetypes of wholeness and association. The moral controller believes they are embodying the light but completely ignores their own darkness. They project evil onto others to maintain the illusion of purity within themselves. And this makes them blind, dangerous, unable to see the nuances of the human soul. If you live close to someone like this, you may start to feel constantly guilty, as if you are always wrong. Even when you are just living, you feel watched, judged, diminished. And the most perverse thing is that often you internalize this judgment. You begin to repress parts of yourself that are natural, human, spontaneous, and mold yourself to an ideal that is not yours. The morality of other becomes your prison. This dynamic is common in families, religions, and rigid environments where obedience is confused with virtue. Jung saw this pattern as a real threat to the process of individuation. For where there is excessive moralism, there is an absence of self-knowledge. The extreme moralistos not want truth, they want control, and when they cannot control the external world, they begin to control the internal world of those around them. But the moral controller is not the only one, guided by unconscious forces. There is another type that is even more volatile, unstable, and unpredictable, the complexed. While the moralist represses and projects, the complexed individual is completely dominated by unconscious contents and reacts from them like an emotion output. In the next part, we will devento this explosive territory where a consciousness loses control and trauma stake the wheel of the psyche. Prepare to encounter the type of person who can embrace you today and destroy you tomorrow without even knowing why. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. Imagine living with someone who at one moment is sweet, affectionate, generous, and in the next moment explodes in anger, shuts down in silence. Or accuses you of something that never crossed your mind. A compliment turns into a demand, a joke becomes aggression. A gesture of action is interpreted as a threat. No matter what you do, it seems you are always treading on unstable ground. This is the experience of those who live alongside a person dominated by unconscious gospels. The complex for Jung complexes are autonomous nuclei of emotion and memory that reside in the unconscious and can take control of consciousness at any moment. They are like fragmented personalities within us created by traumas, psychic wounds, and unrest of adversity. In the book Psychological Teas and also in The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung describes how these complexes can directly interfere with an individual's behavior, causing them to react not to the present but to echoes of the past. A simple comment connects unconscious lido and old abandonment, rejection or humiliation, and those nearby pay thepris. The complex person does not realize they are being guided by these internal forces. When they react with fury, extreme sadness, or exaggerated resentment, they believe they are being rational, but they are not. They are living undigested emotions. And the problem is that this does not happen consciously. It occurs in lapses. There are emotional explosions interspersed with moments of lucidity, affection, or regret. This makes the bond with such a person even more confusing and addictive. You start to think they are not always like this. Sometimes they are wonderful.